at 03:47 hours local time. Strait of Hormuz, southern approaches. The water was black. Not the transparent darkness of deep ocean, but the turbid opacity of shallow coastal water carrying sediment from the Shatt al-Arab river system, mixing with tidal currents that surge through the narrowest choke point in global energy infrastructure at 1.8 knots. Surface temperature, 27 degrees Celsius. Depth, 90 meters average, shoaling to 45 meters across submerged ridges that complicate navigation and create acoustic shadow zones where sonar performance degrades unpredictably. At this hour, 8 Iranian Hengam-class mine warfare vessels departed Bandar Abbas Naval Base in tactical formation, their hulls loaded with 180 naval mines destined for deployment across 3 overlapping barrier zones spanning the 21 nautical mile strait width. The operation had been designated Bar al-Gharq, ocean drowning, and represented 14 months of planning, crew training, and strategic calculation at ministerial level within Tehran's Supreme National Security Council. The logic was elegant. Close the strait through which 21% of global petroleum supply transits daily. Force tanker traffic to reroute around Africa, adding 15 days and $500,000 per voyage in fuel costs. Trigger insurance rate increases, making strait transit economically unviable, even after mines are eventually cleared. Apply sustained pressure on Western economies through disrupted energy markets without firing missiles or deploying forces that could justify kinetic retaliation. Iranian naval doctrine treats mining as the ultimate asymmetric lever, inexpensive weapons creating disproportionate strategic effects. The 180 mines being deployed represented a $4.8 million investment, a fraction of what a single modern frigate costs, yet theoretically capable of closing a waterway whose disruption would spike oil prices $20, $30 per barrel within hours and impose hundreds of billions in cumulative economic costs. The Iranian planners knew detection would occur eventually. Their calculation assumed a critical window, 6 to 12 hours between deployment completion and Western awareness, during which the first commercial vessel would trigger a mine, generating international shipping advisories, Lloyd's insurance reassessments, and navigation avoidance reflexes that would effectively close the strait even if only a fraction of the minefield was confirmed. The goal wasn't permanent closure. The goal was creating uncertainty severe enough that market psychology did Tehran's work without requiring additional Iranian action. That calculation contained one fatal assumption: detection would occur through consequence rather than observation, through explosion rather than surveillance, through reaction rather than real-time awareness. Tehran assumed the ocean provided concealment during the vulnerable deployment phase. The ocean provided no such thing. 03:47, 03:58 hours. The Strait of Hormuz is not empty water. It is an instrumented environment where acoustic monitoring, satellite reconnaissance, signals intelligence, and maritime patrol aircraft create overlapping sensor coverage that functions as a persistent detection grid. The Iranian formation believed they were operating under darkness and electronic silence. They were operating inside a surveillance architecture that had been tracking their preparations since the vessels left port. The first alert came from a U.S. Navy P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft orbiting 180 nautical miles southeast at 28,000 feet. The aircraft's AN/APS 154 Advanced Airborne Sensor, a synthetic aperture radar capable of resolving objects as small as 0.3 meters at 200-mile range, detected 8 surface contacts in tactical formation, proceeding at unusually slow speed into the southern strait approaches. The vessel's radar cross-sections matched known Hengam-class dimensions. Their formation geometry matched mine deployment doctrine, and their location placed them directly astride predicted commercial traffic lanes. Detection timestamp 03:47,014 hours. Automated classification, probable mine warfare activity. Alert transmitted to 5th Fleet Maritime Operations Center in Bahrain. Simultaneously, A constellation of electro-optical and infrared satellites maintained routine surveillance over Gulf waters. One satellite passed overhead at 0349 hours. Its sensors detecting thermal signatures from 8 vessels whose speed and formation matched the P-8A radar contacts. Vessel wakes visible in infrared spectrum confirmed slow-speed maneuvering consistent with precision navigation required for systematic mine placement. The third detection layer came from regional signals intelligence. The Iranian vessels maintained communications discipline, no radio transmissions on monitored frequencies, but their navigation required GPS receivers, which emit characteristic electronic signatures detectable by specialized collection platforms. 8 GPS emissions clustered in formation within the deployment area provided independent confirmation of coordinated activity. By 0358 hours, 11 minutes after initial detection, 3 independent sensor systems had correlated identical operational picture. Iranian mine warfare vessels conducting systematic deployment in the Strait of Hormuz. The surveillance grid hadn't just detected the operation. It had characterized intent, estimated payload, and predicted barrier geometry before a single mine touched bottom. 5th Fleet Commander received briefing at 0402 hours. Authorization for immediate response came 4 minutes later. Tehran's anticipated 6-hour concealment window had collapsed to 16 minutes. 04:06:04:34 hours. Knowing mines are being deployed and stopping deployment are different problems. U.S. Doctrine prohibits kinetic engagement against non-combatant mine warfare vessels in international waters unless those vessels demonstrate hostile targeting or refuse lawful warnings. Iranian vessels were operating legally. Mining is not prohibited in international waters, which meant direct interdiction was diplomatically complicated. The alternative was immediate clearance operations, but clearance requires specialized platforms not immediately available. 4 U.S. Navy Avenger-class mine countermeasures ships were forward deployed at regional anchorages specifically for this contingency, but even pre-positioned forces require transit time. US Sentry, US Devastator, US Scout, and US Warrior departed their stations at 0418 hours, facing 29-minute transit to operational area at 12 knots sustained speed. That created a 47-minute window during which Iranian deployment continued unimpeded. By the time U.S. countermeasure vessels reached the strait approaches, Iranian forces had completed deployment of 122 mines across 2 of 3 planned barrier zones. The mining operation that was supposed to provide strategic surprise had been detected and responded to within an hour. But tactical execution couldn't be prevented in real time. Tehran achieved 68% of their operational objective before coalition forces could physically intervene. This friction mattered. Intelligence providing early warning is strategically valuable but tactically incomplete if response forces require mobilization time. The gap between detection and interdiction represented a vulnerability that Iranian planners might exploit in future scenarios using faster deployment methods or decoy operations, forcing U.S. forces to divide countermeasure assets. 04:47 hours. As U.S. mine countermeasures vessels closed on the operational area, Iranian deployment vessels completed their final drops and began departing northeast toward Iranian territorial waters. Radio warnings transmitted by US Sentry on international distress frequencies went unacknowledged. Iranian vessels maintained course and speed without response. For 17 minutes, both forces operated within visual range. Iranian mine warfare vessels completing deployment. U.S. mine countermeasures vessels preparing to commence clearance. Neither side maneuvering aggressively. Neither side activating weapons systems. Just parallel operations with incompatible objectives conducted in the same confined water space with full mutual awareness. The moment carried potential for miscalculation. U.S. vessels approaching Iranian formation could be interpreted as harassment or interference. Iranian vessels refusing to acknowledge radio warnings could be construed as hostile non-cooperation. Both sides operated under rules of engagement that allowed defensive action if threatened, but neither side demonstrated threat. The confrontation remained purely operational, one side deploying obstacles, the other side preparing to remove them, with both activities legally defensible and neither triggering escalation. By 05:15 hours, Iranian vessels had cleared the area. Total deployment time, 88 minutes. Total mines laid, 180 confirmed across 3 overlapping fields, creating 6.2 nautical mile barrier zone. The operation succeeded tactically. Mines were placed as planned, but failed strategically because detection occurred during execution rather than after consequence. Tehran had created an obstacle. They had not created surprise. And without surprise, the obstacle became a technical problem rather than a strategic crisis. 05:23, 18 Nero hours. Mine clearance began at 05:23 hours when US Sentry's AN/SQ-32 sonar system detected the first confirmed mine at 640 meters range. Classification confidence, 94% positive identification based on acoustic return matching SADAF contact mine dimensional profile. The detection was textbook, exactly the kind of clean identification that doctrine assumes and training prepares for. The second contact, detected 3 minutes later, produced classification confidence of only 67%. The acoustic return suggested mine-like dimensions, but the signature was ambiguous. Natural seafloor features in shallow, cluttered water generate returns that mimic cylindrical metallic objects, coral formations, submerged debris. Even dense schools of fish can create acoustic anomalies requiring investigation. This is the reality of mine countermeasures that operational summaries often omit. False alarm rates in littoral environments commonly exceed 50%. Every suspected contact requires investigation. Every investigation consumes time and resources. And every investigation carries risk that a genuine mine will detonate during approach, or that limited endurance remotely operated vehicles will expend battery power investigating false targets. The clearance operation proceeded methodically, but not perfectly. Of 267 contacts initially detected by sonar and helicopter-towed acoustic arrays, 180 were confirmed mines requiring neutralization. The remaining 87 were investigated, classified as non-mine, and logged for subsequent verification. This 32% false alarm rate is actually below historical average for this environment, but it represents the friction that extends clearance operations from theoretical minimum time to actual operational duration. Additional friction came from equipment limitations. One AN/SLQ-48 remotely operated vehicle experienced hydraulic failure during its 14th neutralization mission, requiring recovery and replacement with backup unit. This single equipment casualty added 43 minutes to overall timeline. Another ROV's tether became fouled in abandoned fishing net, requiring manual clearance by divers, an unplanned exposure to mine detonation risk that doctrine seeks to avoid, but operational reality sometimes demands. Weather-degraded conditions at 11:30 hours, when visibility decreased to 800 meters as fog banks rolled across the strait. Visual confirmation of mine recovery became impossible, forcing reliance on sonar tracking alone. One mine whose mooring cable was severed drifted subsurface on current rather than rising to surface as expected, requiring 90-minute search operation before recovery. These frictions are not failures. They are the normal friction of complex operations in uncontrolled environments. But they matter because they represent the gap between theoretical capability and practical execution. The U.S. Navy cleared 180 mines in 14 hours, not because systems performed perfectly, but because doctrine, training, and equipment redundancy allowed operations to continue despite imperfection. Iranian Operation Bar al-Gharq cost calculation. Mines themselves represented the largest single expenditure. Each Sadaf contact mine costs approximately $28,000 in production, including guidance assembly, detonator mechanisms, mooring hardware, and transportation. M08 influence mines incorporating magnetic and acoustic sensors cost $42,000 per unit. With 110 contact mines and 70 influence mines deployed, total ordnance cost $6.02 million. Vessel operations, 8 mine warfare ships at 88 minutes deployment time plus return transit burned 14,400 liters of diesel fuel valued at $18,720. Crew expenditures, maintenance reserves, and operational overhead $340,000. Command infrastructure, planning staff, and coordination systems $580,000. Total Iranian investment $6.94 million. U.S. Navy countermeasure response cost. 4 Avenger-class McM ships operating 14 hours at documented cost of $8,200 per hour per platform. $459,200. 2 MH-53E Sea Dragon helicopters at 6. 3 flight hours, each consuming 800 gallons per hour at $4.20 per gallon plus crew costs, $178,000. Neutralization charges at $2,800 per unit for 180 mines, $504,000. RUV replacement parts, diver operations, fuel, logistics, and hazard pay, $385,000. Total U.S. operational cost, $1.526 million. The cost asymmetry favored the defender. Iranian offensive investment exceeded U.S. defensive response by a factor of 4.51. This inverts traditional asymmetric warfare economics, where attackers impose disproportionate defensive costs. The inversion occurred because persistent surveillance eliminated Iranian surprise advantage, and pre-positioned countermeasure forces enabled immediate response without mobilization costs. Strategic impact assessment proved more complicated than operational outcome. The strait remained navigable throughout the incident. Commercial shipping continued with minimal disruption as vessels were escorted through cleared lanes during ongoing operations. Oil prices spiked $2.40 per barrel in Asian markets when initial reports of mining emerged, then retreated to baseline within 8 hours as clearance progress became apparent. Lloyd's Insurance underwriters issued temporary advisory increasing war risk premiums 0.4% for Hormuz transit, but rescinded the increase within 36 hours as full clearance was confirmed. The economic disruption Tehran sought never materialized. Not because mines failed technically, but because response speed prevented market psychology from amplifying operational effects. If clearance had required days or weeks, as Iranian planners assumed, insurance and routing reactions would have created de facto closure even with strait physically passable. Instead, clearance duration measured in hours rather than days prevented cascading economic effects. Inside Iranian Naval Command, post-operation assessment produced uncomfortable conclusions. The mining plan was technically sound. Mines were properly deployed. Barrier geometry was appropriate. Crew performance was professional. Yet strategic effect was zero. The failure was not tactical, but environmental. Operating in surveilled waters against adversaries maintaining persistent awareness eliminated the surprise window upon which entire operational logic depended. Iranian planning assumed detection through consequence, a mine detonating on contact with commercial vessel. Detection occurred through observation, surveillance assets tracking deployment in real time. This distinction fundamentally undermines mine warfare effectiveness in monitored environments. Mines remain lethal. Mine clearance remains difficult. But if clearance begins during deployment rather than after discovery, the obstacle never achieves strategic purpose. It becomes a temporary inconvenience rather than a sustained threat. Iranian naval leadership faced explaining to political leadership how 14 months of preparation, $6.94 million in expenditure, and successful tactical execution produced zero strategic impact. The explanation was uncomfortable. Doctrine developed in 1970s, 1980s, when Iranian mining operations in Hormuz during Iran-Iraq War achieved significant disruption no longer applies in 2020's surveillance environment where coalition forces maintain real-time awareness and forward-deployed rapid response capabilities. Regional military observers watching the incident noted Iranian operational success, meeting U.S. technological negation. Chinese and Russian naval analysts studying surveillance and countermeasure performance revised their own assessments of sea denial effectiveness in instrumented environments. The lesson was clear: asymmetric tactics relying on surprise lose effectiveness when adversaries can see everything and respond faster than traditional timelines assume. Iranian mines represent 1970s Soviet technology adapted to regional production capabilities. Sadaf contact mines use mechanical detonators activated by physical contact with hull. M08 influence mines use magnetic and acoustic sensors triggering on vessel signatures. Neither mine type incorporates anti-handling protection preventing neutralization. Neither possesses communication capability, allowing remote activation or deactivation. Neither includes intelligent discrimination, allowing targeting specific vessel types while ignoring others. U.S. mine countermeasure systems represent 2020's integrated capabilities: synthetic aperture sonar with automatic target recognition algorithms processing acoustic returns faster than human operators can analyze them manually. Remotely operated vehicles, eliminating personnel exposure to detonation risk. Helicopter-towed arrays, enabling rapid area reconnaissance. And network-centric coordination, allowing multiple platforms to share information and deconflict operations in real time. The capability gap is not linear. It is exponential. A 1970s mine warfare scenario might require 6 weeks to clear 180 mines using mechanical sweep gear and diver inspection. A 2020 scenario required 14 hours using acoustic detection and robotic neutralization. This 168-14 ratio represents 92% reduction in clearance time. More critically, modern surveillance compressed detection time from days to minutes, a 99% reduction in surprise duration. When detection and clearance timelines shrink by 99%, doctrine assuming extended obstacle effectiveness becomes invalid. Mine barriers that persist for weeks create strategic effects. Mine barriers cleared within hours create tactical inconvenience. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point, handling 21 million barrels of petroleum, daily representing 21% of global supply. Geography creates vulnerability, a choke point that can theoretically be closed. Iranian strategy sought to exploit that vulnerability through mining. The operation demonstrated that geography alone no longer determines strategic outcome in contested environments. The strait's physical narrowness remains constant, but technological capabilities overlay geography with observation, detection, and response networks that diminish traditional advantages of terrain and positioning. Iran deployed 180 mines successfully. The United States cleared them in 14 hours. The strait remained open, commerce continued, markets stabilized, and Tehran's investment in sea denial created temporary obstacle removal rather than sustained strategic effect. This outcome does not mean mine warfare is obsolete. It means mine warfare effectiveness depends increasingly on sophistication rather than quantity, on deployment speed exceeding clearance capacity, and on integration with layered defenses, preventing clearance forces from operating safely. Conventional mining in monitored environments against adversaries with pre-positioned countermeasures achieves tactical nuisance rather than strategic effect. The $6.94 million Iranian investment achieved no disruption. The $1.526 million U.S. response maintained continuity. The operation cost Iran 4.5 times what it cost the United States to negate. And the fundamental lesson confirmed: In the 21st century maritime domain, surprise is difficult, response is rapid, and geography provides no sanctuary against adversaries who see everything and react faster than traditional doctrine assumes possible.